You've got 7 days, or the fines double. Marcus Bellamy's voice was smooth like lacquered wood, polished, insincere, and splintering beneath the surface. He flicked the citation paper with 2 fingers and smirked. 10 inches of grass, that's all it took. I didn't say anything at first. Just looked at the red stamp, second, notice, final warning, and then passed it, toward the tall native grass swaying beside the porch. My father planted that wild mix after the fire line came through a decade ago. Soil repair, habitat support, Marcus didn't care. I took the paper, turned it over slowly, then said, without blinking, "That lot you built your wine cellar on, you never transferred the drainage easement." His mouth twitched. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. He scoffed. "I don't think you understand how HOA authority works here, Jason." "No, Marcus, you don't understand how forensic audits work. But we'll get there." I stepped back onto the porch. This was my father's cabin, hand-built from milled cedar, sweat, and 42 winters of grit. He died right here, pancreatic cancer. Last thing he told me was, "Don't let them push you out." My name's Jason Keller. I'm a forensic accountant. My job is to track money where people swear it doesn't go, and I don't bluff. Marcus saw me as just another grieving man in flannel and mud boots. He saw this cabin as a downgrade to the HOA's polished image, too rustic, too real. He didn't see the man who testified in insurance fraud cases across 4 states. He didn't know what I was about to unravel. He should have walked away. But instead, he decided to mess with the one thing I couldn't compromise on. See, this wasn't just a cabin, that fire pit over there, the one he threatened to remove last month for open flame concerns. My dad and I built that when I was 15. Every summer memory I have is tied to it roasting marshmallows, hearing stories about his deployment in Vietnam, my mom's laughter echoing off the stone. Now it's non-compliant. That native grass out front, my dad had it certified by the Forest Service for wildfire mitigation. Marcus called it unsightly. None of this was about grass. This was about pressure. Squeeze out the old families, flip the land, gentrify the woods, cash in. He'd done it before. He wanted my father's land turned into another hillside trophy mansion. But this land is blood and bone to me. There's no price high enough. Where are you watching from? Because what started as a simple citation is about to become something much, much bigger. Marcus handed me the HOA violation and turned to leave, stepping back into his glossy black Escalade like a senator avoiding a question. But I was already looking past the form, past the threats. I was seeing ledgers, overlooked audit trails, misused funds, and a treasurer who blinked too much when she signed the budget report last spring. They didn't just poke the wrong bear. They poured gasoline on a bonfire my father taught me how to build. The next morning, I took a walk down to the park, if you could still call it that. What used to be a stretch of soft pine mulch and sun-warmed benches had been stripped down to packed gravel and stern signs. No dogs, no music, no unapproved gatherings. There were cameras now, 2 of them mounted on repurposed light poles. Funny, I never saw a vote go out about that. Eli Martinez was already there, picking up litter near the warped picnic table. He was 68, long retired, and had lived in Willow Ridge since 1983. He didn't speak much, but my dad used to call him the conscience of the neighborhood. He nodded as I approached. "Saw the notice on your porch." "Yeah," I said. "Grass crime of the century." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "They got Terry last week," said. Her deck stain was non-compliant. Terry, the woman who brought hot cider to every holiday meeting, and her late husband built that deck himself, he added, like it still didn't make sense. Marcus gave her until the 30th to sand and repaint it. "How's she supposed to do that with her back?" I asked. "She's not," Eli said. "That's the point." I scanned the park. The jungle gym had been replaced with some kind of stylized sculpture, a jagged metal installation shaped like a flame. It cost $15,000, according to the last newsletter. Diane Chu had quietly abstained from that vote. "It's all about pressure," I muttered. "Get people scared, overwhelm them with fines, threats, inspections, push them to sell. Then the real estate people swoop in." Eli raised an eyebrow. "You thinking of doing something?" I didn't answer. Not yet. What I was thinking about was the HOA's annual budget meeting. It had been held last quarter at Marcus's place unannounced, behind closed doors. That's when they approved the property standards audit, the same one now fining people for tree height and mailbox rust. I remembered something else too. During the last open meeting, Marcus slipped in a motion to increase the HOA reserve fund for disaster preparedness. No itemized breakdown, no third-party review. Just a number, $230,000. That's when I started connecting the dots. Marcus had been methodical. He'd stack rules, fines, and citations to make life unbearable. Then he'd send quiet feelers through local agents. If you're thinking of selling, we can get you a fast offer. It was coercion with a suit and smile, and people were falling for it. Terry was on the verge. The Callahans had already caved last month, sold below market, left within a week. Their place was under renovation now, funded by a mystery LLC that nobody could identify. I looked back toward the hill, where Marcus's mansion loomed like a modernist throne. Oversized, glass-faced, and just a bit too high for zoning. That's when it hit me. If he'd manipulated the reserve fund once, he might have done it before. If he'd pressured people into selling, there'd be a paper trail. Quiet transfers, unusual payments, misuse of funds, funneling money to contractors he controlled. This wasn't just power, it was profit. And me, I don't just read balance sheets, I weaponize them. Where are you watching from? Because this story isn't just about one man's grass. It's about an entire community being squeezed until they give up what matters most. And I've decided that's going to stop. The next Thursday, I went to the budget update meeting. They held it in the community clubhouse this time, probably because Marcus thought it made things look inclusive. Never mind the fact that the agenda had been posted only 36 hours earlier. There were 9 of us there, mostly older residents. A few new couples, clearly unsure if this was something they were supposed to care about. I saw Diane Chu near the front, already seated, arms folded tightly across a manila folder. She didn't look at me. But I saw the shift in her jaw when I walked in tight, like she was bracing for a storm. Marcus stood near the whiteboard with his usual air of polished control. "Welcome, everyone," he said, gesturing to a pie chart labeled Reserve Allocation, 2025 Projections. "Let's keep this brief. No open floor today, we're just here to report progress." He flashed his perfect teeth, then clicked to the next slide. Security enhancements, $84,000. Diane's grip on the folder tightened, her knuckles turned white. I took a seat in the second row, close enough to read the fine print on the slides. New fencing, gate maintenance, digital deterrent infrastructure. Whatever that meant, none of it had passed a full vote. Marcus kept moving, flipping slides like nothing was wrong. Landscaping, reallocation, discretionary repair credits, adjusted compliance fees. All vague, no itemized contracts, just big numbers and smooth phrases. But Diane's body told a different story. She kept shifting in her seat, her fingers twitching near the folder like she wanted to open it, then stopping herself. Her eyes never stayed still for more than a second. Every time Marcus said, "Approved by finance," her lips pressed together like she was swallowing something bitter. I'd seen that look before in depositions, in courtrooms. People who know something's off but are afraid to say it. At the end of the meeting, Marcus closed his laptop. "Any quick questions? Email the board. Thanks for showing up." The crowd thinned. A couple of people wandered over to the snack table. I stayed seated, watching Diane as she stood. She avoided my eyes again, but this time, she hesitated. Her folder was still clutched tight to her chest, but her body leaned just slightly in my direction, like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the permission yet. I stepped toward her. "Hey Diane, that fire pit you signed off on as compliant last year," she flinched. "I can't talk about any of that, Jason." Her voice was sharp but brittle, defensive but not angry. I nodded. "Okay, just wanted to say, you're not the only one who sees what's happening." That made her blink. A flicker of something behind her eyes, maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe both. Her grip on the folder loosened just a bit before she turned and left, her pace too fast for someone just trying to beat traffic. I didn't push. She wasn't ready yet. Drop a like if you've ever been in a meeting where everyone pretended nothing was wrong, I thought, stepping out into the cold. The air was sharper now, sun fading, wind kicking through the gravel paths beside the clubhouse, and I realized the real battle wasn't going to be in open meetings or on tidy presentation slides. It was going to be in the silence, the looks, the paper trails behind locked doors, the people who almost speak up. "Where are you watching from?" "Because I just met the woman who holds the key to blowing this whole thing open. She just doesn't know it yet. The cones were already in place when I got home. Bright orange, right across the end of my driveway like a construction zone, except there was no construction. Just a laminated sign taped to a metal stake that read, "Unapproved vehicle access temporarily restricted." And below it, in small print, "Pending review of compliance violations." I stood there for a moment, engine idling, watching two HOA contractors unspool yellow plastic tape across my private drive like I was some kind of crime scene. One of them looked up, awkward. "Sorry, sir, just following board directive." I cut the engine and got out. "You're blocking access to a private residence," he shrugged. "We were told the path didn't meet updated safety grading." That was a lie. This driveway was repaved 4 years ago, leveled, permitted, approved. My father kept every file, and I'd already seen the time-stamped inspection log. No complaints until this week. They were escalating. And now, they weren't just threatening paperwork. They were blocking movement, choking access. I pulled out my phone and started recording, not for social media, but for time-stamped documentation. I panned across the cones, the tape, the sign, and the license plates on both contractor vehicles. They noticed. The older one stiffened. "Look, we're not here to start trouble," he muttered. "Then take the cones down," I said calmly. "Or let Marcus explain to my insurance carrier why emergency services couldn't access the property." He hesitated. I stepped closer. "I've already reported 2 prior violations of ADA access this month. This makes 3. You sure you want your name on the report?" The younger guy grabbed the cones. By the time I made it, up the drive, adrenaline was coiled in my ribs like a spring. This wasn't just a game anymore. They were trying to trap me, force a misstep, make me lose my temper. They didn't know I'd spent 12 years reviewing internal embezzlement cases for hospitals and school districts. My patience has scaffolding. I sat on the porch and took out the last 5 violation notices. Grass length, woodpile spacing, fire pit obstruction, now driveway access. Each one timed 5-7 days apart. Each one phrased ambiguously enough to avoid clear legal refute, but when combined, they told a story, a pattern, a paper trail of harassment that just might cross the threshold into liability, especially when it blocks physical access. I opened my laptop and started a new spreadsheet, Willow Ridge HOA 60-day review columns for violation code date divided by time served, physical effect, legal precedent board members cited. This wasn't just for me anymore, because Terry's deck stain, Eli's porch light color temperature warning, the new approved mailbox designs memo sent out this morning. All of it pointed to a board acting under the assumption that nobody would ever challenge them properly. They were wrong. And Diane Chu's face, that flicker of doubt I saw in her, told me she knew it too. "Where are you watching from?" "Because they just blocked my driveway." Next, I'm going to find out what they're really hiding behind those inflated budget reports. And when I do, they won't be able to block what's coming. I didn't sleep much after the cones. Something about the precision of it, the way they timed that violation just days after the last told me it wasn't random. It was a strategy, and I was ready to respond in kind. By Friday afternoon, I was sitting in the public computer room at the county library. My home internet ran through a provider that Marcus's real estate group partially owned. No sense taking chances with what I was about to search. I pulled up the county's business license database first. It's clunky, barely indexed, but searchable by LLC name. I started with what I knew from the HOA's expense reports, Everline Property Services, the landscaping contractor that had billed the HOA $41,000 over 6 months for aesthetic maintenance. They didn't exist in the state registry. That was the first crack. I tried variations, Everline Maintenance Company, Everline Services Group. Still nothing. Then I narrowed by address. The payment invoices all listed a P.O. box near Ridgeway. I cross-referenced it with state contractor licenses. Bingo. The box was tied to a holding company called MB Equity Group. The initials stopped me cold. Marcus Bellamy. I dug deeper. MB Equity Group wasn't just receiving landscaping payouts, it also held controlling interest in Hollow Branch Holdings, which recently acquired 3 homes in Willow Ridge, including the Callahan Place. It was a shell game. The HOA finds people into submission, they sell under pressure. The homes get flipped or leased under LLCs owned at least partially by Marcus. And every dollar spent on community maintenance flows right back to his hidden pockets. I saved screenshots of the ownership trail, matched EINs, registered agent names. I even found a shared phone number between MB Equity and the compliance consulting group that had been newly hired this year to evaluate our properties. All roads pointed back to Marcus. And now I had something better than a gut feeling. I had proof that the HOA's reserve fund wasn't just mismanaged, it was being bled dry into entities Marcus controlled. One invoice stood out, $12,400 for soil restoration audits filed under Everline. The file listed a job site on my property line. I checked the satellite archive. No one had touched that soil in months. The charge was fabricated. That's not just unethical, it's insurance fraud. I sat back, heart pounding, brain already mapping the angles. If I reported this to the HOA, it'd vanish. If I reported it to the state, they'd stall or misfile. But if I brought it to the right kind of third party, like the insurance company underwriting our liability coverage, it could force immediate action. Marcus thought he was playing chess, but I audit the board. Where are you watching from? Because today, I found the vein in the beast, and I plan to squeeze until it breaks wide open. I needed air. After the library, I drove without thinking, took the long, winding road behind Willow Ridge that cuts through the pines and bends around the old stone wall. My tires crunched gravel in the lot as I pulled up to the cemetery, our cemetery, the one the HOA never talks about in brochures. I hadn't been back here since the funeral. My father's plot sat beneath a crooked oak near the edge, no flashy markers, just his name, 2 dates, and a brass military service tag hammered into the earth. I stood in silence. The wind whispered through the grass, tugging at my jacket like a hand on my shoulder. And just beyond the fence, you could see the slope of our land, our cabin, the fire pit, the stacked logs, the wild native grass he planted with his own calloused hands. That land was his legacy, and Marcus Bellamy was trying to rip it out, dollar by dollar, notice by notice. I crouched by the grave and laid down the only thing I had in my hand, a printed invoice with Marcus's LLC name tied to falsified soil restoration work. "Guess what, Dad?" I said softly. "He billed $12,000 for fixing soil on your land, soil that didn't need fixing." A crow called from the branches above. My chest tightened. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was desecration. That's when the grief flipped. I stood and looked out across the trees, heart pounding not from sadness, but from fire. They wanted people like me gone because we didn't fit the brochure. They wanted families scared, isolated, and quiet. They wanted to turn history into high-end listings. But my name's Jason Keller, and I don't do quiet. I'm not just going to stop him, I said aloud. I'm going to expose every dollar he's stolen. I opened the notebook I'd tucked into my coat. Inside were the printouts, LLC mappings, fake contractor trail, and that one gem, the invoice for my soil, which I'd already cross-verified with satellite records and county permits. One invoice ties it together. One claim shows intent. Because when someone profits from public power while privately holding the strings, that's corruption. I stayed another 20 minutes, tracing my fingers along the rough edge of the stone. I could feel the weight of the battle ahead. It wasn't just about evidence. It was about timing, leverage, pressure. That's when I made the call. Not to Marcus, not to the HOA, to someone who'd understand what this meant, Serena Lane. A contact from my old insurance work, now a lead investigator for one of the state's largest liability firms. We hadn't spoken in a year. I left a message with 3 words, conflict of interest. I didn't need to say more. She'd call back. As I walked back to the truck, the sun began to drop behind the ridge. The oak tree cast long shadows over my father's grave. My boots kicked dust along the path. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. And Marcus Bellamy? He wasn't facing a homeowner with a grass problem. He was about to face a man who could calculate the cost of his empire down to the penny. Where are you watching from? Because next time I show up at a board meeting, it won't be to ask questions. It'll be to show receipts. The message was waiting for me when I got home. A sticky note, folded and wedged in my screen door. Come by after 8, don't park in front. D. I read it twice. It wasn't just a meeting, it was a risk. Diane Chu had never made a move like this. Not publicly, not privately. Something must have shifted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe fear. Maybe she'd finally realized Marcus was using her signature to build his kingdom. I waited until 8:15, then walked to her house and cut through the alley behind the maple hedge. Her porch light was off, but the screen door creaked open like she'd been waiting for the sound. She stood in the doorway, holding a mug with both hands. Her eyes were tired, her lips pressed into a line so tight it looked painful. "Inside?" I asked. She shook her head. "Here's fine." We stood in silence for a moment. Then she said, "He forged 2 of them." I blinked. Forged what? Approvals. Budget authorizations. I never signed the expansion invoice for the digital security install. She took a long breath. Or the emergency landscaping bid for the fire road. I stepped closer, voice steady. "You have copies?" She nodded, then glanced over her shoulder. Inside, on my laptop, I started scanning everything last year, just in case. Her voice cracked on the last words. I didn't press. She reached behind the planter and handed me a flash drive, wrapped in tissue. "Don't plug that in anywhere near your house. Marcus has a guy watching email traffic. I saw him reading the board's web server logs last month." I took the drive carefully, like it was made of glass. "Why now?" Her hands trembled slightly. "Because it's gone too far. He's pushing people out, lying to the board. And last week, he tried to make me backdate a resolution. Said it would just keep things tidy." She looked me in the eye for the first time. "It wasn't tidy, Jason. It was criminal." I nodded slowly. "And you're ready to say that on the record?" She hesitated. Her fingers curled tighter around the mug. "Not yet, but if you push this forward, if it hits the right hands, I'll confirm it when it counts. I'm not trying to destroy anyone," she said softly. "I know," I replied, "but I am." She almost smiled at that. Almost. I tucked the flash drive into my coat and turned to leave. Then she added, "You're not the only one he's targeted. There's more. I've seen the payment trails. I just didn't know how to fight back." I turned on the bottom step. "You don't have to. That's my job." She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something in her eyes that looked like peace. As I walked back through the darkened hedges, the air felt sharper, clearer. I had the records. I had a treasurer ready to validate them. And if Serena confirmed what I found, Marcus wouldn't just face a fine, he'd face a full audit, insurance collapse, and potential criminal investigation. Where are you watching from? Because now I've got the inside files. And the clock just started ticking for Marcus Bellamy. The old study still smelled like pipe tobacco and cedar. I hadn't been in here much since Dad passed. The room felt preserved, like a museum of habit military medals, county maps, a cracked leather chair that still creaked the same way. But tonight, it wasn't nostalgia pulling me back in. It was war prep. I placed Diane's flash drive on the desk like it was a detonator, booted up the offline laptop I used for secure work, and took a long breath before clicking it open. There were 5 folders, each one labeled with a date and project name: Security Install, Landscaping Fire Grant, Maintenance Contract X 121, Special Vote Resolutions, and one marked Discrepancy Trails. That last one hit like a drumbeat. Inside were screenshots, PDF scans, spreadsheets with highlighted cells, and most importantly, 2 versions of the same document, one that Diane had approved and another with a falsified signature, dated weeks earlier. Marcus had altered financial resolutions and pushed them through as if they were law. The digital fingerprints weren't just sloppy, they were damning. He hadn't covered his metadata. The signature was pasted in, the timestamps were off, the vote confirmations were missing headers, and the routing for reimbursement was to MB Equity Group. It was everything I needed. I opened my personal case framework and started layering in data. Diane's time-stamped originals, the altered versions, state licensing records, vendor shell, LLC mappings, HOA financial statements from the last 3 quarters, 3 fake invoices connected to non-existent jobs, and the $230,000 emergency fund siphoned out in tranches without proper ratification. Drop a like if you've ever had to untangle someone's cover-up, one spreadsheet at a time. I thought, staring at the flowchart coming together on my screen. It was worse than I expected. Marcus hadn't just bent rules, he'd monetized them. Created violations, generated compliance expenses, routed funds through fronts he controlled, and used the HOA's own legitimacy as the perfect laundering mechanism. The move now wasn't to go public, not yet. The move was pressure. Insurance companies hate financial opacity. I pulled up Serena Lane's profile and encrypted a file share with the subject line, HOA Reserve Fraud Formal Review Request. She'd know exactly what to do with it. The moment she escalated this, their liability coverage could be suspended. And without coverage, Marcus couldn't enforce liens, he couldn't issue violations, he couldn't collect dues, he couldn't hide. But I wasn't done. I started drafting a second packet clean, chronological, visual, designed not for lawyers but for homeowners, my neighbors, the people who'd been fined, threatened, and pushed out. I wanted them to see what Marcus was doing. It wasn't about grass, decks, or paint. It was about cash. And now I had the blueprint. In the corner of the study, I noticed something I hadn't seen in a long time. My dad's old county seal from when he worked as an auditor in the 82nds. It had fallen behind the filing cabinet, dusty and dented. I picked it up and set it beside the flash drive. Legacy. This wasn't just revenge. It was restoration. Where are you watching from? Because I just finished building the case. And tomorrow, I start lighting fuses. The cafe on Willow Pass Lane didn't look like much, but it was where the neighborhood gossiped, schemed, and traded complaints over bitter coffee and lukewarm muffins. The kind of place that overheard more policy decisions than any official meeting. That made it perfect. I took the booth by the side window corner view, good sightlines, quiet enough for a plan to take shape. My laptop was in my bag, but I wasn't here to click. I was here to listen. Within 20 minutes, Eli Martinez sat down across from me. No pleasantries, just a nod and a whisper. They raised Terry's dues again. They're trying to drive her out, I said. He didn't disagree. I slid a folder across the table, printed highlights from the forensic trail. This is how Marcus does it. Fake invoices, circular payouts, reserve fund bleeding into shell companies. I've got 6 examples, more pending verification. Eli's eyes scanned the pages. You sure? I don't guess with numbers, I said. And Serena Lane is already investigating. If we push at the right time, insurance will suspend their coverage. His eyebrows rose. No insurance, no enforcement power. Exactly. A sharp clatter from the counter broke the moment. Across the cafe, Diane Chu walked in. Not in her usual subdued cardigan tonight. She looked focused, purposeful. She didn't sit with us, but as she passed, she dropped a second envelope onto my table. Inside, copies of the original budgets, with margin notes in her own handwriting. Proof that the manipulated files Marcus had circulated were altered after she signed the real versions. She didn't say a word, just kept walking. I leaned toward Eli. We go public at the meeting, but first, I want people talking. Gossip, outrage, I said. The kind that spreads before the agenda ever hits a mailbox. Over the next 48 hours, I quietly delivered 5 more packets sealed. Anonymous, just enough to spark curiosity and concern. One went to the Callahans, who'd been strong-armed into selling. Another to a younger couple fined for having an unapproved solar panel. One to a former board member who'd resigned last year without explanation. Each package had a note, ask who really profits from your violations. By the time Sunday rolled around, I started hearing the murmurs. One neighbor mentioned conflict of interest while raking leaves. Another said she was sick of the scare tactics. Even the cafe barista told me someone was looking into the reserve fund numbers. I'd struck the first chord. And then came the ping. Serena. Insurance coverage review opened. Hold tight. It was happening. I checked the HOA's bylaws one more time. No insurance means no authority to file liens, issue fines, or enforce violations. The entire foundation of Marcus's control would dissolve the moment the underwriter froze the policy. I called Eli one last time. You ready for the meeting? He chuckled. Been waiting 10 years for someone to bring fire to that table. I glanced at the growing group outside the clubhouse bulletin board. 5, maybe 6 people, flipping through the newly posted agenda. More would come. Word was spreading fast. This time, we wouldn't be showing up to listen. We'd be showing up to expose. Where are you watching from? Because I just set the last trap, and Marcus is walking right into it. The parking lot was already half full when I pulled in, not typical for a midweek HOA board meeting. Usually, it was 6 people, a projector, and Marcus grinning like a cruise ship director. But not tonight. Tonight, people showed up early. I sat in my truck for a moment, watching them. Arrived neighbors who hadn't attended a single meeting in years, residents who'd been quietly targeted for years. They looked tired, but alert. Nobody was smiling. That meant they were ready. I stepped out and pulled my satchel from the passenger seat. Inside, printed copies of the full financial report, Diane's signed statement, vendor cross-reference charts, a notarized cover letter addressed to the HOA's insurance underwriter, and one letter sealed in a manila envelope marked "To be read." Allowed upon rebuttal, Marcus wasn't going to walk out of this with denials. I headed inside. The mailroom hallway reeked of lemon disinfectant, but the bulletin board was still stained with water damage from the last rainstorm. And right in the center, freshly tacked and shining in its laminated arrogance, was the evening's agenda. They were planning to speed up foreclosures. They knew the pushback was coming, and they were doubling down. As I walked into the main room, Diane was already there. She stood near the folding tables, papers in hand, blazer buttoned, face unreadable. But when our eyes met, she gave the tiniest nod. The flash drive was around her neck. She was ready. Eli was talking to Terry and two other homeowners in the back, a small cluster of quiet fury. I handed him 3 copies of the summary packet. If Marcus tries to spin, hand these out. You think he'll show? Oh, he'll show, I said. He still thinks he can win. I made my way to the front row and placed my documents carefully on the table nearest the mic. I didn't need to shout tonight. I just needed to present. The insurance underwriter hadn't responded publicly, but Serena's last message said their compliance officer would be observing remotely. That's all I needed, because all Marcus had ever wanted was silence. And tonight, he was going to meet the opposite of silence. I looked around the room, more than 30 people now. The quietest were the ones watching the door, the ones who'd been hurt, overbilled, pushed out, labeled non-compliant for things they'd built with their own hands. My neighbors weren't just angry, they were awake. And Marcus? He was late. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Just as the murmur started, the glass doors opened, and in walked the man himself, designer suit, HOA binder, and that crooked grin like he was about to teach a seminar on property value. He didn't make it 2 steps before he saw me, and something in his face flickered. He scanned the room, saw Diane standing stiffly, saw Eli with a stack of papers, saw the rows filled with people who used to pretend he wasn't there, and for the first time since this war began, he looked nervous. Where are you watching from? Because the board meeting just started, and tonight, we're flipping the power structure in front of the entire community. Marcus stepped to the front of the room like he always did, straight-backed, calm, commanding, but the usual rhythm was missing. No jokes, no handshakes, just eyes scanning every face like he couldn't find the script. That's because tonight, we wrote it. The room quieted. Folding chairs squeaked as people leaned forward. Diane sat at the end of the board table, hands folded tightly over the flash drive hanging from her neck. Marcus cleared his throat. Let's begin. Item 1, approval of minutes. Objection, I said, standing. His eyes locked on me. You're not a board member, Jason. No, I said evenly, but according to Article 4 of the Willow Ridge bylaws, any resident with financial documentation relevant to HOA operations may request time during the member comment period. A pause, a ripple of murmurs. Marcus tried to wave it off. We're not at that section. It's relevant to every section, I said, stepping forward and placing a folder in front of him. This is a copy of the last 6 months of board-approved invoices, along with any one proof that 3 of them are fraudulent, submitted by a contractor tied to your private LLC. A silence hit the room like a power outage. I continued. We also have 2 versions of financial resolutions, one signed by the treasurer and one altered afterward to approve a $12,400 expense for a soil audit that never occurred. Terry gasped. Eli's mouth curled into something like a grin. I turned to Diane. Can you confirm the validity of your version? She stood slowly, voice shaking but firm. Yes. The ones I signed were dated weeks later. The others, I never approved. I opened the next envelope. We've also submitted all supporting materials to your liability underwriter, who I've confirmed is reviewing your risk profile as of this morning. If they suspend your coverage, which they should, you'll have no authority to issue fines, enforce liens, or collect dues until this is resolved, Marcus snapped. This is slander. You have no idea. It's not slander when it's backed by timestamps, audit trails, and bank routing records, I interrupted. Would you like to explain why MB Equity Group shares a contact number with the new compliance contractor? Someone in the back let out a low whistle. Another voice shouted, "Yeah, Marcus, tell us why you fined me $300 for a flower box while you stole 6 figures." He raised his voice. "These documents aren't verified. You don't know what you're talking about." "Then why did Diane resign 5 minutes ago?" I said, stepping aside. All heads turned. Diane reached into her folder, pulled out a typed letter, and handed it to the secretary at the edge of the board table. "Effective immediately," she said. "I'm cooperating fully with the insurance investigation." Marcus's face drained of color. Someone stood in the back, one of the young couples who'd been fined over a solar panel. Motion to vote no confidence in the current president. "I second it," Eli said, standing. "I third," Terry added, voice shaking but strong. Chaos followed. People stood. Voices rose. The room filled with accusations and stories, years of resentment boiling into a roar Marcus couldn't suppress. He reached for the gavel, but it didn't matter anymore. He'd already lost the room. I leaned in one last time. "You built this system to squeeze every drop from this place, but it turns out you forgot to insure yourself against people who know how to read numbers." His hands trembled on the table. "Where are you watching from? Because tonight, Marcus Bellamy lost everything he built, and tomorrow, we rebuild this community ourselves." The flames danced low in the fire pit. Pine crackled. Sparks lifted into the night like silent messengers heading skyward. I leaned back on the bench my dad and I built, letting the warmth press into my legs, staring out over the land that nearly slipped away. It had only been 4 days since the board meeting. 4 days since Marcus Bellamy's mask finally cracked, and his empire started collapsing. The insurance underwriter responded within 24 hours. Coverage: suspended pending formal investigation. That meant no power to fine, enforce, or collect. And without that, Marcus's influence turned to dust. Diane's resignation triggered a domino effect. 2 other board members stepped down the next morning. A third, who'd quietly opposed Marcus for months, called an emergency community vote. He was elected interim president by the end of the week. As for Marcus, he tried to deny everything, claimed it was clerical error, blamed Diane, claimed harassment, but the documents spoke louder. And Serena? She didn't just escalate the report, she submitted a secondary fraud referral to the State Real Estate Commission. Marcus's mansion sits dark now. Rumors say he's lawyering up. No one's seen him since the insurance freeze. What we did see was our neighborhood waking up. Terry stopped me by the mailbox this morning just to say thanks. Said her daughter cried when she found out they wouldn't have to sell. Eli brought over the original HOA charter, said he hadn't dusted it off since '92. But it was time to rebuild from the roots. The fire pit hissed as a log shifted, embers tumbling inward. I tossed on another piece of cedar, dry, fragrant, cut by my father's hand. He would have smiled at all this. Not at the fight, but at the fact we finished it. We're rewriting the rules now. Dues freeze for 3 months while we audit spending. No more hidden votes, no more off-the-books consultants. We're even drafting new bylaws to cap enforcement authority and require third-party review for major expenses. Diane came by yesterday, not to talk about Marcus, but to return a book my dad had loaned her years ago. She said she's thinking of running for treasurer again, this time without fear. That felt like the real win. It wasn't just about forcing Marcus out. It was about taking something twisted and making it whole again. I looked out over the cabin, porch light glowing, wind rolling over the tall native grasses that started it all. Grass they called a violation. Grass my dad planted as a promise. I think that's what makes these fights worth it. Not just the money, not just the win, but the memory you're defending. The legacy that lives in every square foot they try to label non-compliant. So, where are you watching from? Have you stood up to a board that crossed the line? Have you seen your home treated like leverage instead of life? Because if you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. We're not done yet. We're just getting started.